Hey guys, welcome to Thrive Bites Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Colin Zhu, and thank you so much for listening on. You could have been anywhere in the world and you decided to spend just a few moments of your precious time, and we greatly appreciate it. Here on the podcast, we talk about three things: living a plant-powered lifestyle, enhancing emotional resilience, and creating a thriving mindset. And I interview a range of passionate guests such as physicians, dietitians, coaches, entrepreneurs, and many more. And please join me as I deliver these engaging, informative, and high-valued conversations for you. So what are you waiting for? Come on inside. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Thrive Bites Podcast. I'm very, very excited for this episode. I'm going to have my guest, Dr. Christine Bishara. She is a practicing integrative gastroenterologist from the New York area. We're going to be talking about all things gut health, the immune health, what to eat, what not to eat, why are they so important, and how do they connect with each other. We're also going to go into a deeper dive into her own personal transformation, so you don't want to miss this, and I'll see you guys inside. Okay, guys, well, welcome to another episode of Thrive Bites Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Colin Zhu, and welcome to a new year, new episodes, and thank you so much for being here with us. You could have been anywhere in the world and you decided to join us, and we are eternally grateful. So for today, we have a wonderful, wonderful guest with us today. We're going to talk about everyone's favorite topic is gut health and all the things that come with it. So I'm going to be inviting our guest, Dr. Christine Bishara. She is a medical doctor. She is a founder from Within Medical, and it is a medical wellness practice that places emphasis on the mind, body, and gut-brain axis connection to prevent and manage disease. She has over 20 years, actually 30 years, we were just talking offline a little bit, and she has discovered the connection between these systems and how they play a significant role in disease prevention and management, and how it is not adequately addressed. She's board certified in internal medicine, and she is also certified in integrative medical weight loss by the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. She's a published author, and she's also the author of a scientific article linking gut flora and balances to COVID-19. Her discovery is the first of its kind to link COVID severity to the gut. And we're going to talk more about that. And she's been also featured in Halt's Living 2020 Wellness and Weight Loss. And she is an expert in the New York City area. So without further ado, we can spend all day long. Please welcome Dr. Bishara. Hello.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much. By the time of this recording, you are the first in this new year. Where are you calling from?
New York City.
All right. I'm actually originally from New Jersey, so totally understand the Northeast. It probably won't be snowing. Not missing that snow, but it probably won't be snowing for another couple of months or so.
I was just going to say, you probably don't miss the weather. It's been pretty cold lately.
Yes, I do not miss it. Well, Dr. Bishara, thank you so much for being here with us. I'm really, really excited to sit down and talk to you. I know you have a new book out. It is called The Gut Revolution. Okay. Very, very beautiful. I like the green. So, and we're going to dive deep into that, but I want to orient the audience to you. My favorite topic is understanding the superheroine origin story, right? How does one go from point A to point B? My understanding is that you actually went through a personal transformation. So how did your arrival into the health profession come about?
Yeah, like you said, and I think everyone is passionate about something that they've personally gone through. So for me, it was being that obese teenager who just was struggling, eating everything in sight, always hungry, and couldn't really lose the weight. And I was almost in kind of this like fugue state where I didn't realize it until I was 15 years old and I went to my pediatrician's wellness visit for the annual visit. And she weighed me and she said, "You are more than 30 pounds over the upper limit of normal." And she said, "If you continue like this, you're going to be morbidly obese." And it was a wake-up call, and I remember her telling me that she doesn't think I'll ever lose the weight. And so at the time, she didn't know me very well. Well, maybe she did. I'm the kind of person that always has to prove people wrong. If they tell me I can't do something, I'm even more determined to prove them wrong. And so,
Okay.
yeah, that summer, that's exactly what I
I
did.
New York attitude right there.
Yeah, right. Maybe. Yeah. So that summer, I lost 30 pounds, and I did it through these mechanisms, which were not really known back then, but it was kind of like my first experiment in weight loss and nutrition and gut health and intermittent fasting, which we can definitely talk about. But that helped me lose 30 pounds. And then it wasn't really until I went to medical school that I kind of put two and two together, and I started really understanding that we have these amazing internal mechanisms in our body that really help us to just become more healthy and immune wise, but also mentally healthy just from what we eat. So that really pivoted my decision to focus on nutrition, whether or not, I was doing internal medicine or anything else. It was something that I just knew that I would always want to do and help people with their nutrition, lifestyle, and goals. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's super fascinating. And my understanding for the audience is that you're originally from Egypt and you practiced and got your schooling and training in Egypt, correct?
Yeah. So many people ask, where did you do your undergrad? And I said, I didn't do undergrad. I went straight to medical school from high school. So yeah. And it's funny because I always tell people, I don't know if I would have necessarily made it into medical school if I was in the US, because I think, and there's nothing wrong with our system, but I think we focus a lot on very math and science brained individuals and those that maybe aren't as humanistic. And so for me, I really saw, yes, I was good in math and science, but I really saw the human side and the nutritional aspect of medicine. And that's really where I kind of got that interest. So I don't know. For me, it was a great experience, and I learned so much during medical school.
Do you recall from your training whether nutrition, diet, or lifestyle, any form of preventative care was taught in your schooling?
No, not directly. Indirectly, maybe in biochemistry, when you're studying all those pathways like glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis, and you realize that your body is a powerful machine, but not directly, and not even in residency in New York, unfortunately. And I don't know if you had a similar experience, but we don't focus enough on nutrition and using that as a preventive measure for our patients.
Yeah, I talk a lot about this with my other guests that are physicians themselves, and we talk a lot about the paucity of this type of training in the schooling and the training systems as well. And I'm happy to say that it is getting a little bit better. I think that things are being more recognized, and we are up-leveling the newer generation. So hopefully that will change. I know that we were talking about your daughter, so hopefully she'll get some.
I agree. I was literally just talking to a friend who's a neuroscientist. Actually, she's one of the co-authors of my study. And I was literally just telling her, we really need to start a nutrition course for all nursing schools, medical schools, anything that's going to be health related. We really need to focus on that and make that as a core curriculum requirement, because it is so important. You know that, and I know that.
Yeah, for sure. Let's go back to you. And my question is that when you were going through your personal health, journey, and I know that weight management was something near and dear to you, when was it that turned you on about how that was related to whether the gut? You talked a lot about metabolic pathways, in the book. There's a lot of neurotransmitters. There's so much, right? There's a lot of intricacies. I just think about just gigantic major highway system on the US map, right?
Yeah.
So how did that arrive to you, and how much later in your career did that come up? Because one would think that gastroenterology, it would just be, duh, right? It would just be the first thing you would learn in your training.
Yeah.
But as I talk to more and more specialists, it doesn't seem so.
No, not at all. And you're absolutely right. And for me, it was really just kind of stumbling on these different things that I was trying when I was 15, even. I would diet with the typical calorie counting and I would lose weight, but I was very hungry. So then I really started incorporating more plant-based foods and just fiber-rich foods. And I found that I wasn't as hungry anymore, but mentally there was this shift where I just literally started feeling better. My mood was uplifted, and perhaps it was from losing the weight and feeling good and looking better. But I really feel it was more than that. It was on a neurochemical basis. And that's really kind of what piqued my interest also, is just finding out there really is this very powerful body and mind connection that we don't tap into. And now, just having done so much more research on the gut and realizing this wasn't just in my imagination, we do have, you mentioned this highway. We have this huge highway from the gut to the brain through the vagus nerve, and they're communicating, but we have these trillions of organisms that live inside of us that are actually helping us make neurotransmitters. But if we don't feed them what they want to eat, they're unfortunately not going to be able to produce what we need. And so that's really why I try to teach people about, yes, you're eating for yourself, but you're also eating for these trillions of organisms, right? That have different functions, and there's good and bad, and you can feed the bad ones and they're lazy. And if you feed the really good ones, they're going to produce these byproducts that are going to help you physically, but also mentally. But it was really just kind of this thing that I stumbled upon and I found worked for me. And then I guess just having that medical background, and I think people take MDs and DOs more seriously when they speak about these topics, is, there is a scientific basis behind them.
Yeah, for sure. Just some quick facts for the audience. I think, we're discovering a lot about the microbiome. It's almost the equivalent of, our fingerprint and DNA, and how everyone's microbiome is so unique. There is at least 39 trillion, right? You can correct me if I'm wrong. Just stop me when you're the expert.
I think it's definitely that amount, or possibly more. Yeah.
Yeah, possibly more. 39 trillion. And my understanding from the latest science is there's at least 90% of serotonin receptors that we discovered, in the gut, 50% dopamine receptors. Yep. And I just also learned that there's also stretch receptors in the small intestine as opposed to the stomach, which is really, really cool. Anyway, in terms of the practice, did it change up how you practice? Because I know you have your current practice right now, but did you start from the get-go in terms of the clinical practice with this newfound understanding with the applied science, or did it change, in the middle, and then you discover some new things with your patients?
Yeah, that's a really good question. No, it actually didn't. I started off doing traditional internal medicine for many years. I always had that passion for nutrition, and I would always read up on things. And so I would discuss these with my patients. But what I found also really bothering me is I didn't have time. We had no time to really talk to our patients about nutrition. And so about 7 years ago, I said, you know what? I mean, I love traditional medicine and I learned so much from it, but I think there's more to it. And that's really where I kind of broke off and just started my own practice. And oddly enough, the pandemic was a big catalyst for me to be very confident in what I preach about, because of the study that we published on the link between the gut and COVID. And I think probably if it wasn't for the pandemic, many people wouldn't have realized how important immune health is, right? Because COVID severity and who suffered and who didn't really boiled down to the strength of our immune system. And the strength of our immune system is directly linked to our gut. For me, that was really a wake-up call for many people to actually start to listen. But it was something that I was always passionate about, but just kind of pivoted a few years ago.
Yeah, no, super, super important. And, we're still, in a way, we're kind of quote unquote on the tail end, but then it wakes us up to, well, if there's going to be another pandemic down the road, we got to be prepared. So it really reframes how you look at things. For those of us that are not as well versed in the immune system, can you give us some basic primers? Where is it located? What is it exactly? And how does that interplay with the gut? If you can just, in layman's terms.
Yeah. And I talk a little bit about this in the book, and I tried to simplify it as much as I could, because I didn't want it to be just another medical book where people are like, okay, yeah, fancy terms and scientific complexes. But the gut is, the immune system is present all over our body, but a large portion of it is actually present in our gut. And believe it or not, we have these organisms that we talked about that actually help to modulate the immune system. And they work together really well with our immune cells. And as I mentioned, there are these beneficial organisms that we're just kind of starting to realize how important they are. And They not only regulate immune pathways, inflammatory pathways, but they also help make vitamins. They help to make these products that it almost like they stand on the front lines of the gut and protect our gut. And this is where we see that really important immune strength and benefit that we get from the immune system in our gut, because when our gut lining is weakened by, for example, not eating the proper foods that feed these guys, then they start to die off. And unfortunately, harmful bacteria start to collect more, and they produce these toxins that actually weaken the lining. So when the lining's weak, we start to leak out things into the blood system. And then this is where we really start to see autoimmune and all these immune issues that we have, where people call it inflammation, right? What it boils down to is keeping the gut lining strong by producing these things that help to keep it strong. And the way to produce it is to feed beneficial organisms what they love to eat, which is fiber, right? And there's different types of fiber we can talk about, but that's really what it boils down to. Simple.
Yeah. It's very simple. And I think what you're alluding to is something called the leaky gut syndrome. And it wasn't too long ago that it was kind of really, we're using the words woo-woo, right?
Woo, right, exactly.
Yeah. But now we understand that there's so much interplay with, for example, inflammatory bowel disease, IBS even. And you were talking about inflammation. And in my practice, I do general practice family medicine, I started to notice a trend, an upward trend of allergies. Yes. On how we have allergies that are acquired later in life, and yet they were fine with them before. So and you discovered more and more that the contribution with how your gut is and how that interplay and how weak that interplay is with the immune system creates these responses. Wouldn't you say that?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's a telltale sign right there when somebody tells me I've developed a nut allergy in my 30s or 40s. To me, like you just said, right? Why? You have to ask yourself why. What's going on with your immune system that you're now reacting to things that you normally didn't react to? And then another way to look at it is if you look at Africa, right, as a continent, they don't have a lot of allergies. And I think it's because they have a stronger immune system and they're exposed to more things. And we have this kind of germophobia here in the US, which I think might be a detriment because we need to be exposed to beneficial organisms in the environment. And we need that strengthening in our immune system to be able to handle that. So it's a big problem.
Most certainly is. And in my work, we deal with a lot of antibiotic resistance and the superbugs that are formed, and how most likely one day they just won't work anymore, when in the past it was representative of a miracle when penicillin was discovered, right? A panacea. And I could see it come really, really quickly where it just won't work anymore. And but it's very, very interesting. My next question to you is, how does COVID-19, with the immune system work? Was there anything about COVID-19 that stood out, right? In your book, you talk a lot about children, the demographics of children and older adults, right? But let's back up a little bit. Was COVID-19 different? Like, how was it different, and how did that interplay with the immune system?
Well, so yes, it's different in that this specific virus we've never really been exposed to. I mean, we've been exposed to different types of coronaviruses, but not this specific one, right? And I think this one really impacted our immune system. And so we have to look into, why did it do that? Why did it impact, especially certain people's immune system, right? And so for me, the way that we kind of came to this discovery was also kind of coincidental in that my husband is a critical care pulmonologist in New Jersey, actually. So early on, they started seeing all these really sick people in their ICU, and he would come home and talk to me about them. And we had one interesting conversation one night where he was talking about how they were seeing these elderly people, the people that we were told on the news were getting really sick, but then he was seeing people who were younger and didn't really have any medical problems other than maybe a high BMI, and not even a very high BMI. And then we kind of just started talking about the types of treatments that they were giving, and they were giving these medications that inhibit like a major inflammatory pathway, which is called interleukin-6. I don't want to go too deep in it, but interleukin 6 is basically a pro-inflammatory pathway that the body releases when it's exposed to something that it needs to ramp up inflammation against. And so interleukin 6 is a really powerful pro-inflammatory released marker. And they were starting to see that these medications were working on interleukin 6. So we kind of just had these conversations, and then it was like almost like a light bulb went off. And I was like, I wonder what's going on with kids, because they're not really getting sick at all, or they're getting very mild symptoms. So this is when we really started digging deep into the gut health of children versus adults. And I just had this hunch that there was something going on in the gut that was protecting them, being that we know that the immune system is largely housed in the gut. And what we found very interesting is their gut microbiome is very different from adults. And so if you look at a child's gut, the microbiome composition is a large proportion of it is this one bacteria called Bifidobacterium. 60 to 70% of their gut is this one bacteria. And it slowly starts to decline as we get older. And so we started looking at the function of Bifidobacterium and seeing, well, what's going on with Bifidobacterium? And maybe this is their protective factor. And we started finding some interesting things in the function of Bifidobacterium, in that it's a very beneficial organism. It's been studied for many years. It's been known for many years to be beneficial. In fact, it's in almost every probiotic formula. And so we looked at the functions of Bifidobacterium, and believe it or not, there have been many studies on Bifidobacterium and how people who have higher Bifidobacterium levels tend to have milder flu symptoms, less likely to get allergies. And so the more we dig, the more we started finding that the reason why children weren't really getting sick is because the Bifidobacterium actually downregulates these major pathways that COVID was affecting, including interleukin 6. One of its main functions is downregulating interleukin 6. So we started just looking and linking, and then we found all these studies, again, on Bifidobacterium that we were shocked to see. And then, believe it or not, there have been further studies with like ivermectin, for example, mechanism of action. There's one doctor that did a study on it and found that the reason why ivermectin has worked to help with symptoms is because it increases Bifidobacterium levels in the gut. Another study that was done in Italy by an Italian gastroenterologist who gave high-dose probiotics, including this bacteria, found that his patients that got the probiotic formula and another set of patients that didn't get it, the ones that got the probiotic formula, no one needed to be ICU hospitalized, while the other group did. So it was a lot of different studies coming out after ours, kind of confirming our hypothesis in that this was the protective factor. And now we are seeing so many more studies related to Bifidobacterium and its protective factor. But unfortunately, as adults, it tends to die off, especially if we're not feeding it what it needs to eat, believe it or not. And that's what's happening, is we might not need as much as kids, but we are getting to the point where some people have no Bifidobacterium in their guts. And this is, I think, what predisposed certain people to more severe infections.
Does Bifidobacterium, you said does it naturally decline over time, or is it a result of just the things that we end up eating, over time?
I think it's a combination of both. I don't think we need as much as we did as infants, as children, because, you're born with this innate immune system, but over time, right, we have this adaptive immune system where we're exposed to different things in our environment, and we build almost like a database, right, in our immune system. And so I almost feel like Bifidobacterium in large numbers for babies and children is their kind of boost and protective factor when they don't have that adaptive immune system yet and that database. And over time, the levels do decrease because we probably don't need as much, but we still need Bifidobacterium. And, if you look at certain studies that looked at actually Chinese, and I believe it was Chinese and Japanese or maybe Italian centenarians, for people who live to be 100, their Bifidobacterium levels in their gut are higher than the non-centenarian elderly group. And they think that this might be it's almost like this fountain of youth, right? So we don't necessarily need as much as we did as children, but I think in certain people whose diets are not good and it's, highly processed and just not healthy, and they're not eating foods that feed it, we're losing more Bifidobacterium than we should. And those are the people, I think, that are at high risk. And unfortunately, there's certain people that are at high risk, people with inflammation, metabolic issues, obesity. These conditions tend to deplete Bifidobacteriums even more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very, very interesting. What did you guys conclude when you did the study? So let's go back for a second. So did that conversation start the whole study and you needing to ask this hypothesis? And what did you guys ultimately find out?
It was, when my husband said that, he said, for the question that he asked me was like, do overweight individuals have high IL-6 levels? Because he knew that I obviously see a lot more patients for weight loss. And I said, actually, they do. It's an inflammatory marker. And so that was one night. And then the next day, I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And I had a couple of friends who were scientists, molecular biologists and a neuroscientist. And I asked one of them to just kind of start looking at the pathways, right, of this bacteria. Just look at the pathways, look at COVID's pathways, look at the cytokine storm. And we kind of started just putting two and two together. And every time we would say, hey, let's see if Bifidobacterium works on this, for example. And then we'd find that, yes, the cytokine storm is very affected by COVID, and Bifidobacterium works on those same pathways. So it's downregulating those inflammatory pathways. It's upregulating anti-inflammatory pathways, and it's kind of just all fit. And we recommended at the time high dose probiotics with this bacteria in it. People with acute issues. This was in May of 2020, so just shortly after COVID kind of hit us. High dose probiotics, zinc, and vitamin D were my protocol for my patients. And they actually did really well. I don't think I had one single patient who ended up in the ICU. And I did have a lot of patients who were high risk, but the protocol seemed to work really well for them. And yeah, they actually added it onto the Critical Care Frontline Alliance as a part of the treatment protocol, probiotics containing Bifidobacterium. So
Yeah.
It wasn't as mainstream as we would have liked it to be. I wish we could have helped more people. But for whatever reason, we just couldn't get any traction on getting this more mainstream through the news, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think a lot of things where, going back to nutrition, right? Not as well, you studied outside of the country, but here, not a heavy emphasis. And when we find that when you don't have a heavy emphasis in school, doctors are less apt and less confident to be able to dispense it. And as a practitioner of lifestyle medicine, I think living the example is your best teaching tool. It's your best form of medicine to be able to impart on someone. And I think that, when, over time, when you can't display this, then it's just, not going to happen. And when you don't have that emphasis in nutrition and people are not teaching it and no one's really, talking about it, then it's not going to, go with that traction, like you said. My next question to you is, in terms of the foods that you discovered, I know that there's a chapter in your book that talks about the top 50 food for that, which is really cool because in our plant kingdom, there's literally tens of thousands. So I'm really interested on how you arrived to the top 50. But let's ask if a reflexive question is, what have you found that are quote unquote unhealthier, that predisposes or that you've seen with people with a poor immune system or that's linked with having a higher risk with COVID? Have you noticed anything during your years of practice?
Yeah, I might stir a little controversy. Okay, so alcohol is a big one. People don't realize how detrimental alcohol is for the gut. But if you want to think about alcohol and hand sanitizer, what is it doing? It's killing off bacteria on your hands. Well, alcohol is doing the same thing in your gut. It's killing off these beneficial organisms. And so that's a big one. People who tend to drink a little more than the occasional, whatever, once a month drink, that was one. Highly processed foods is not rocket science. I think we all know this, right? But the one thing that I did notice, and this is where I'm probably going to stir some controversy, is people who are on like keto or carnivore diets, they might do really well early on losing weight, right? Because ketosis itself is a great mechanism in our body. And we can actually tap into ketosis through intermittent fasting or restricting our eating times, not necessarily starving, but eating everything and just restricting times. And that allows your body to tap into ketosis naturally. But I think what happens is with people who eat high keto diets, which is really just high fat, high protein, right? And very limited carbs, but very limited healthy carbs.
Mainly from animal sources, you're saying?
Yes, exactly. Like plant-based foods that have good fiber, right? If you're not eating that, you're going to lose a weight. There's no doubt about it. But over time, what's going to happen is your microbiome is going to start shifting. And it's not necessarily a healthy thing, because we see that people who eat very high animal protein, high fat, tend to feed and have an elevated level of certain bacteria called Fusobacteria. And when we have a very high Fusobacteria ratio compared to a low Bifidobacterium ratio, this is where we start to see increase in inflammation, but also increase in colon cancer risk, right? And so I'm not saying Fusobacteria is a bad bacteria. It's one of those bacteria that's present in our mouth. It's part of the normal oral flora. And it's okay to have a little bit of Fusobacteria in our gut. It's really when that ratio, right, where we have such high levels and such low levels of the beneficial, like Bifidobacterium, is where we start to see this increased risk of problems in the gut. And so what I say is, yes, induce ketosis, but induce ketosis through restricting your eating times. And you're meant to eat fruits and vegetables, right? We are omnivores. I know some people don't believe in that. And if you're vegan and plant-based purely, I think it's fine if you know what you're doing and meticulously really pick what you're eating. You should be fine. But I think the majority of people who go completely plant-based aren't, right? And they're eating probably unhealthier stuff. But I think the carnivore diet that we've been told is high fat protein is really not. If you look at, believe it or not, blood samples and, not blood samples, but teeth samples of our ancient ancestors who were supposedly carnivore, it actually looks like they ate mostly plants. And it was like a foraging, feasting type phenomenon, which makes sense, right? They forage through whatever is in season, plants, berries, things like that. And then the occasional animal protein that they'd find if they killed a cow or they found whatever. Yeah. It's not, they weren't eating this every day. And so that's really the carnivore diet, is mostly plants, foraging, and then feasting on the occasional animal protein. I think that might cause a little controversy, but I'm just stating what the research has shown and science has shown is, yes, keto is great. Keto diets are okay for, a short period if you want to lose weight, but they're not good long-term for your gut.
I think the science of autophagy and being able to, in layman's terms, be able to declutter and do that spring cleaning is very, very important. And we're discovering more and more benefits from fasting, and fasting has been practiced for millennia, right? You see it in cultures that practices Ramadan, for example, right? And we're finding out, even not the most restrictive, but the least restrictive would be like intermittent fasting. We're seeing a lot of benefits, there. Even I've always wanted to ask this question is, if you just compared, going back to carnivore, even if you just compared the actual carnivore species like wolves and, wildcats and things like that, if you just look at their digestive tract, you're a GI expert, right? And you compare that with actual herbivores or omnivores or species that, have more of a plant predominant diet, the length is very different, right? The makeup and composition of the length is very different, which spells out that, and you let us know.
Yes, very good point. You're right.
Yeah.
You're talking about like cows and animals.
Yeah, you find that the actual length is 3 to 4 times longer. Right? Yeah. Because you need to have more surface area and length to be able to digest, fiber is what Absolutely. We're gonna talk to, right? Resistance starches and soluble fiber.
Absolutely. It's interesting because if you look at like a Mediterranean or a Blue Zones type diet going to humans, right? Their diet has been shown to be the healthiest, right? Every year the studies come out and they find that the Mediterranean diet is the healthiest. But why is that? It's because they eat mostly plants, right? They eat a little bit of animal protein, just enough. But again, it's like you said, it's a lot of fiber. And if you're moving your bowels on a regular basis, you're kind of decreasing that bacterial overgrowth and that release of lipopolysaccharides and toxins that are causing that, cascade effect of inflammation and leaky gut. So it definitely makes sense. And we've seen that even in humans. It's interesting that you say animals because I think animals have higher Fusobacteria levels, like dogs, for example, they have higher Fusobacteria levels, but it works a little bit differently in them. But yeah, you're right. Like dogs don't have a longer lifespan, right? Because they're eating more like animal protein.
Yeah. It's very interesting. Right. Well, we also domesticated them and we don't know, whether, you're not domesticating them for longevity.
Yeah,
right? So you're intermingling all that genetics. Anyway, that's another
true.
topic
That is very true. Yeah.
on a vet podcast. Okay, so let's so we talked about the study. So tell me more about the book, right? What can one find to learn from your book? What can they learn from it? What can they implement, right? It's a learning, but is it also a strategy book as well?
Yeah. So the book took me a year and a half to write. And I think part of the reason why it took me a little bit longer than I thought it would be is because I really wanted to balance that. I want this for everyone, but I want this also to be stimulating enough for people who know about the gut, like doctors, right? Who really might not know as much about the gut as I'd like them to. So I try to balance the science by simplifying it. And so for me, it was really more of a simple guide to understanding what's going on in your body and understanding that your body is a powerful healer by explaining complex terms in a simple manner, but backing it up with research. So I posted, I think I have like over 200 studies referenced in the back of the book because I really wanted people to be confident in what I was writing, but understand it in a simple way so that you don't have to be like, I don't understand this, right? This is medical lingo. I hopefully balanced it well enough. It started off at 300 pages and then it went down to 179 because I was like, this is not needed. This is not needed. I think I would love for just people to understand that this is in my hands and I have control over my health, and understanding the concepts of what's going on in my body allows me to make those decisions. And I think being knowledgeable about a topic and just learning more about it empowers you to make the change. So that's really what my goal was. And to also put Bifidobacterium on the map.
Yeah, for sure. We're going to close out here. If I were to say, what are three things you wish people knew more about gut health? If you just had a magic wand and we just matrix everything up and just implanted three key takeaways for gut health, what would you want to impart to them?
Oh, that's a good one. Number one, I think would be, it is a huge factor in your mental health. And you mentioned this earlier with serotonin. Yes, there's a huge part of serotonin being made in the gut, but believe it or not, all that serotonin made in the gut, or a lot of it, is actually for the gut. Serotonin helps with control of muscle contraction in the gut. So it actually helps us with all of that, but it also helps us with mood. And those guys in there are making serotonin for our mood as well. So I would definitely say it impacts mental health tremendously, immune health, and weight loss. So those are the three: mental, immune, and weight. And immune health we talked about with COVID. And with weight, believe it or not, your microbes, the good ones, are actually making substances that affect those GLP-1 receptors that we now are seeing work really well with those injectable medications. Is you actually have natural internal GLP-1 enhancers.
Agonists.
Yes, exactly. Stimulants that will affect those receptors and make you full. But you have to make them full first by feeding them what they want, which is the fiber, pectin, inulin, resistant starch. Mix it all up. And, like you mentioned, I did write a list of the 50 vegetables and fruits in there. And the reason I came up with those is I looked at the ones that really had the fibers that we know feed those guys. Inulin is a huge one. Artichokes, asparagus, onions, garlic, those are really big bifido feeders. Pectin is another one. And so I wrote foods contain pectin because that's another one that feeds a different kind of microbe. A resistant starch, like sweet potatoes, for example, are another one. And so that's really where I came up with that list. But yeah, if I had to kind of come down to three, gut health affects your mental health, your immune health, and your weight more than you'll ever know.
And I love it. And we were just talking offline about how everything is connected and, how mental health was brought up to the surface during the pandemic. And, having practice, and seeing all ages, you just say to yourself, well, they're kind of all housed within one body. And so it just doesn't make any sense why you would separate and, put them into compartments and think about it, like that. And so, hopefully this conversation can stir someone to say like, you know what, everything is connected. I don't want to look at, just pieces, but you want to look at the whole puzzle, right? Dr. Bishara, thank you so much for being here with us. Where can they find you? Where can they find your book?
Thank you. My book's on almost every platform, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I think it's on Walmart too. And I'm on several social media platforms. Instagram is my big one. It's Dr. Christine B, doctor spelled out, and then Christine B. If you can't afford to see a holistic doctor, at least get the book and just, learn on your own. It's what my intention was, to just make it accessible to everyone.
Awesome. Well, definitely go pick it up. We'll put it into the show notes when this airs. And we really appreciate your time. And thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Guys, this is another episode of Thrive Bites Podcast. If you like this, please click like, comment, and subscribe. And if you felt that this was a benefit for someone else, please let them know as well. And until then, please say goodbye to Dr. Christine. Bye. Hey guys, we hope you enjoy that episode. If you like that, please like, comment, and subscribe. And please follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, and anywhere that you listen to your podcasts. And if you felt that this was a benefit for someone else, please let them know. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating, and we greatly appreciate it. And we'll see you on the next one.